Karen Craggs-Milne is a Kenyan-born Canadian. She is a recognized leading global expert with over 20 years of international experience promoting equity, diversity, gender equality, and inclusion. She is an Obama White House recognized gender equality changemaker in 2016 and a Global Goodwill Ambassador for Sustainable Development Goals in 2018. Karen is a leading go-to expert for organizations that are serious about getting equality work right. As founder and CEO of Conscious Equality Incorporated, Karen works globally with NGOs, corporations, and governments to deliver on their equality mandates internationally and with real impact. Karen's work has touched millions of men, women, and children, and she has trained hundreds of people on how to bring the principle of conscious equality to life. In this interview, Karen talks about diversity and inclusion in details and how to value everybody in multiple ways. She embodies true leadership. Karen currently lives in Canada with her husband and her 3 children. Here she is, the inspiring Karen Craggs-Milne on the Barry Media Show. Thank you, Karen Craggs-Milne, for being on the Barry Media Show podcast.
Thank you for having me, Barry. I'm very happy to be here.
It's a pleasure. A little bit background about yourself.
Well, I am a Kenyan-born Canadian, very proud to be part of the African diaspora. I spent my first 20 years growing up in Kenya, and I learned so much that I apply in my work in diversity, gender equality, and inclusion as a result of my African roots and history. So as I said, I now live in Canada, and I have 3 kids and a husband, and I travel all over the world to promote and address equality issues. So I work with governments, with corporations, and with NGOs. And one of the things that I do is teach people what equality is all about and how to take the principle of treating people fairly and make it practical and applicable for them in their context. So whether it's designing a school or a hospital in a community, or whether it's working with a large corporation or a bank so that they have more diversity with their staff, or whether it's working with the government to help them implement gender equality, the Sustainable Development Goals. I do a range of work around the world, but it's always around addressing equality issues.
What is conscious equality?
Well, Conscious Equality was the name of my company, which I created about 1.5 years ago. And I've been doing this work for over 20 years, but I reached a point in my career where I felt like we were making a lot of mistakes. I had traveled all over the world. I'd worked with different NGOs. I'd seen projects where we were hurting people instead of helping people. And I felt like there were a few things about the way we do equality work that we need to change. And so the concept and the language of conscious equality captures those changes. So the first one is, it's a way of doing equality work that is informed by spiritual lessons and universal laws, because I study that. The second thing about conscious equality is that it's about understanding that having good intentions is not enough. So as I said, there have been projects where people were trying to help, and they created new or worse issues for the communities. So, really, I want people to understand, the third element of this is so important, and it really completes the message, which is that this work requires us to be intentional, and that requires us to know what we are doing. Because if we don't know what we are doing and we don't recognize that equality work is an actual skill set, there are strategies and tools and concepts you need to learn, and that it changes the way you do business and the way you do programming. If we don't understand that and we don't take the time to work with people who understand it or to learn how to apply it ourselves, we end up creating more problems instead of fixing them. So conscious equality is really bringing those 3 pillars together and saying, let's do this work and let's do it right. And my biggest goal is to work with people who want to learn how to get this work right.
So What is diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Yes, we hear that term thrown around a lot, right? Diversity, inclusion, belonging. And I like to, when I'm teaching, keep things simple. So I'm sure you've heard of this example or similar ones where people say diversity is when you're invited to dinner. Inclusion is when you're asked to eat with everybody. So not only come to the table, but also please, enjoy. And, you're encouraged to enjoy and participate. And belonging is when you are bringing your own food to that dinner, and you're like, people are appreciating what you're bringing, they're enjoying your food as well. I know you're from Guinea, so imagine you're going to somebody's house and you're bringing a dish that you made, and they're not only enjoying it and appreciating it, but you feel like you're being accepted fully. So belonging is a feeling, whereas inclusion is more of an action, like you're given a space, but you feel like you're trying to fit in that space as opposed to being who you really are. So those are the three key distinctions, and they're not, so the one message is they're not all the same. Diversity really isn't the same as inclusion, and inclusion isn't the same as belonging. And then there's a fourth element which I introduced to the work, which is about transformation. And transformation isn't just that I bring my dish to the table and everybody's happy and excited and they appreciate it, but it's, the fourth piece is, let's go in the kitchen and cook something completely different together. What does that look like when I'm not bringing my dish and you're not bringing your dish? We're saying, let's grab some ingredients and create something brand new that is, an experience that we've shared together that has resulted in something completely different. And so to me, there's four elements to doing diversity and inclusion work. And most people only stick to the first one or two of those four elements. Let me give you a different example. When I talk about gender equality work, I often talk about another framework that I've developed, which is the PPD framework. And that is presence, participation, and decision making. So those three, and then of course there's the fourth one of transformation. So, diversity is almost like presence. So you look at, the different groups of people and you say, who's missing? Are women missing? Are men missing? Are people of color missing? Are people with disabilities missing? And you create strategies to bring those groups of people in because they're missing. So there's a gap of who's at the table, right? Or who's not invited to the party, for example. So that's diversity. And the strategies around that are, how do we increase and improve recruitment? How do we go to different places so that other people who normally wouldn't see our job descriptions come and apply for the job? So that's diversity. Inclusion, as I said, is like you're being invited. So even if it's a dance party, you're being invited to come and dance, right? So inclusion is about taking actions to say, what are we going to do to include these groups of people? And so with my PPD model, it's about, presence. So your presence is you're showing up. Participation is you're actively talking at the table. So in the case of dancing, you're getting up and dancing. In the case of dinner, you're eating what's provided at the table. In the case of an organization, inclusion is really about saying, like, okay, like how do we get people to meaningfully participate in the different opportunities that we have? How do we get them to apply for promotion opportunities? How do we get them to have, let's say to attend conferences and things that will help develop their career? But really the focus again is about fitting in. So like you have to do a lot of work with inclusion to really fit in. And then belonging is, as I said, you're bringing your own food and you're free to be who you are. So it's almost like a different degree of inclusion, but this time you're showing up. And a big piece of inclusion is not feeling shame, not feeling ashamed of your life story, of where you're coming from, of what you bring to the table. Like it's almost the opposite of feeling shame. You're actually feeling pride. You're feeling like who you are is valued and embraced. And the strategies around that are very different. So for example, one of the banks that I worked in for 10 months to help them develop their accessibility strategy, one of the things that stood out for me from a belonging perspective was not only did this organization have a lot of people of color, which is the first two elements, and not only were those people of color in different roles and positions in the organization, but the belonging piece that really surprised me because I'd never seen it anywhere else was they were bringing their authentic ethnic food to work. Like you would never see that. You would never see somebody bringing a curry and cooking it in the kitchen and the whole kitchen smells of curry and everybody's like, oh, that smells so good. Like, what did your wife make today, right? Like, did you bring enough for me? Like in most cases, we adjust, we adapt ourselves, because you don't want to show up at work and eat that thing that everybody's going to go, oh my God, I hate the smell of curry. And I've heard people say that. I don't like the smell of that fish, or, oh, that looks gross. What is that? That green banana thing that you're eating. I don't know what it is. It looks weird. So it's like, how do we create culture? And belonging is a lot about culture, whereas, the first two, diversity and inclusion, are a lot about systems and processes. But with belonging, we're saying, how do we value everybody in multiple ways? So I've had people who were hired and they changed countries. They moved from one country to another country because they were skilled. And then they came into the organization, and then they were not allowed to be who they were. So they were told, go buy a whole new wardrobe so that you look like everybody else. And from my perspective, as the person's manager, I didn't care what they wore. What I wanted them to feel was that they were at home and that they were valued for what they brought to the table. And heck, like if I wanted to show up in an ethnic piece of clothing on Fridays when everyone is wearing jeans, why can't I, right? So the transformation piece that really builds off belonging, and very few organizations have gotten it right or even gotten there at all, is to say, not only do we want you to feel like you can be yourself, and that we value you and acknowledge you, and there's no shame around your history, your culture, your language, your food, your hair. Hair is a big thing for people. There's a lot of conversations about women in the Black community who say that they straighten their hair and they do all kinds of things. They spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and they go through a lot personally to be able to feel like they're acceptable. Because if they don't do all of that, and if they embrace who they really are, they don't feel like they'll be given the opportunities to speak on behalf of the company or to be given a promotion. So it's not only about all of that and showing up feeling comfortable, but transformation is about actually turning all of that around and changing the culture and the values of the organization. So informing the organization and the way we do our work, and changing business as usual in the process. It isn't like you go from step 1 and then you move to step 2 and step 3 and 4. It's actually like all 4 steps happening at the same time in different ways in different spaces, and being able to support the different initiatives and recognize, oh, here we're working on diversity, over here we're looking at transformation, in this team we're doing inclusion work, but how do we keep that movement moving forward in each of those different spaces at the same time?
What are the advantages of diversity and inclusion?
So many. So there have been a lot of studies that have tried to quantify the advantages. And, one McKinsey study, for example, showed that when you have a more diverse group within the organization, the revenue increases by 33%. So, and why does that happen? Because when you have diversity, you have different ways of looking at a problem. You have higher rates of innovation. You have lower rates of people leaving the company, which means you have to keep recruiting. You have to, all the expenses that we pay when people leave, and then you recruit for another job, and you have, all these openings. You have lower mental health issues if people feel like they belong, and that can be really good. Like, you can reduce a lot of expenses around that if you get it right. You have a broader customer base because people see themselves in your organization. So when I pick up the phone, who do I talk to? Is it always a white person? Whereas, I'm not from the white community, and I would like to speak to someone who understands me and my values and is able to really connect with me deeply. Like, it impacts everything. It impacts leadership style. It impacts customer service quality. It impacts the type of products you create, the innovations, the problem solving, and ultimately the bottom line is income, right? Like I said, it's proven that you have better income when you have more diversity and inclusion. So I gave you a few examples. And one of the things that I do for organizations is what I call a diversity audit, which means I do a 360-degree approach to understanding what are you doing well and what are you doing right, and what are the opportunities for strengthening that work, and how can we leverage what you're doing to actually build momentum. Now, my goal is very different from other people who work in this field. When I do this work, it doesn't matter whether you're a government or whether you're an organization or a small community initiative. My goal is to add so much value to what you're doing that you become a world-class model and leader in your space. So whether it's working on maternal child health programming in a community in Tanzania, or whether it's working with a government like St. Lucia, who's trying to figure out how do we implement gender in policy, I want to get it right such that you can leverage the work that you're doing and really create a reputation that opens even more doors for you. So when we're looking at, what are some examples, what can we do around diversity and inclusion? The first thing that we need to do is do a 360 mapping. Like a lot of organizations make the mistake of saying to somebody, okay, we need to figure this out. Maybe somebody complained, or, there's an issue with our reputation. And so we need you to fix this. And they give it to a person who's already got a full-time job in the company. So you want to make sure that you don't do that, because when you look at 500 Fortune companies, very few of them actually have a full-time dedicated position for diversity and inclusion work that is fully funded and that has resources to actually do the work that needs to be done. So to do this work right, we want to make sure that the person is not just doing it on top of their regular job. We want to make sure that they have the right resources. We want to make sure that we do a 360 assessment so we know what our strengths are and where the opportunities are, because that's how you create action plans. You shouldn't be creating action plans without knowing what the full picture is. And one of the biggest pieces I think that are really important to diversity and inclusion work is really talking and engaging with the staff in an honest and meaningful way. And the reason why that's important is because a lot of companies want to do diversity inclusion work, and they bring in the consultant to talk to the leadership. So I'll give you an example of, exactly why I do things the way I do. And that is that I worked with a company where they said to me, we want more diversity and inclusion. We don't have enough Black people, for example, in the company. We have one or two, but not many. So to them, the strategy and the priority was, we're bringing Karen in to help us figure out how to attract more Black people into the company because we want more diversity. But then I said, okay, that's great. Now I've heard from you. Now I want to hear from your staff because I want a 360 approach to this work. And when I spoke to the staff and I asked them, this is what the leadership is saying is the priority. This is where they see the issue. How do you feel about it? You would be shocked what the Black people who are already working there said to me. They said, I've been here for 4 years. My company doesn't even know my name. Like, there's only 2 or 3 of us, and they keep getting our names wrong. They don't even take the time to get my name right. I would never recommend this company to my friends or to anyone in my community because they don't treat us with respect and they don't value us, right? So to do diversity and inclusion work right, you have to create a process where it's not only top down, it's also bottom up, and you're really listening to what is going wrong and where people are dropping the ball. And then you're bringing that back to the table and saying, now I have all these different perspectives of people's experiences working here. Now I can figure out how to create a plan that will not only address it, but will change the way you do things so that you as a company are a better employer and that your staff have better experiences on a day-to-day basis.
This leads me to my next question. Who are the people that can actually make diversity and inclusion happen in a company?
That's a great question, and it depends on the company and what the setup is. But of course, we would start with the board and say that the board has a lot to do with a company. Now, I'll take one step back and say, one of the things that I teach everybody that I teach, whether I'm doing a public speaking engagement or a training session or even working with an organization as an expert, one thing I always say is there is no such thing as an accident, right? If a certain organization looks a certain way, that is not some random thing that happened. It looks that way because the processes, the culture, the decisions being made have created that result. So if you have a board that is all men, or even all white men, or even all Black men, the reason why that board continues to look that way is not because women are not interested in a leadership role. It's because of the way decisions are being made at that board level. And a very common practice is for board members to say, oh, we have an opening open. Who do you know that you want to bring in from your own network, right? That's not good practice, but that's the truth about the way boards work. They often say, go ask your friends and see who wants to be part of this network. So, and in that practice, what happens is we bring in people who look and sound like us, which is why we have a problem creating diversity in boards. But boards are very important for making decisions and creating direction for leadership. The other one is the CEO. I've worked with organizations that were really struggling to get this work right. And then they brought in a CEO for whom diversity and inclusion was a core value. And just by changing leadership, everything about the work changed because that leader then sets the tone. So, if we look in Canada, Metrolinx is an organization that does transportation for passengers back and forth into the city. And their leader is from South Africa. And he is 100% committed to diversity and inclusion. Of course, his background with apartheid in South Africa, I'm sure, helped him come up as a young professional with this as a core value. And it's changing the way they're doing business at Metrolinx because the leader cares about this as an issue. So that's important. But the other thing that's really important is when you hire somebody like me, for example, and you say, okay, we want to create a position and we want to bring you in to do this full time, it's not enough to just bring somebody in and then say, okay, this is your problem, go deal with it. A big part of this work is knowing where to position that person. Because, for example, there's a lot of conflict that happens between HR, who's trying to cover up why things are the way they are and what they're doing wrong, and the fact that there's a lot of bias in their performance measurement and in their bonuses at the end of the year and everything. So often there's a lot of gaps in HR. And when you put a person like me and you make us report to HR, it's a problem because now I have to make a fight with HR instead of reporting up to the CEO and then being able to be really objective about the feedback that I give the CEO. So if you want somebody like me to make a difference, not only do you need the position, but you need to be able to put that person in a position that helps them succeed and helps them have enough, what I call teeth, to be able to make recommendations that are really going to help the organization move forward. And too many organizations, if they do have this role, they put them so far down that the person can't actually do their job properly.
What small change or changes can an organization make to improve diversity in the workplace?
So I would say one key change that I implemented with an organization that I was working with that cost no money, because money is always an issue, right? People say, I want to do all of this, but I don't have the money. And I always say that that's no longer an excuse because I've created miracles without extra money. I know what's possible. But one thing you can do without adding any money is when you recruit any new positions, whether it's a finance person, a marketing person, whether it's, the receptionist of your company, you can add questions about whether or not they value diversity and inclusion. So it's no longer enough to hire the best accountant. You want an accountant who can do the job, but who also values diversity and inclusion. And the reason why this is important is twofold. First of all, it means that that person appreciates this as a value, which means they align with the organization, and they will treat others who are different with respect on a day-to-day basis. But also, there's a theory called the tipping point theory. And when we're looking at creating organizational change, it's not enough to have one or two people who care about this issue and then you train everybody else, because training will only achieve so much in terms of change. But when you start hiring more and more people, and all of a sudden you've gone from 10 people who care about diversity and inclusion to 30 people who care about diversity and inclusion, there's a tipping point that happens where the organizational culture starts to shift. And it shifts because there's a peer thinking, people start to adjust their thinking, their language, their behavior to the group norms, and the group norms are changing, which means everybody starts to align. Now, of course, there's always people who will continue to be difficult to work with, who may even resist the change, who may say, I don't think women belong in leadership. I don't know why she was given that promotion. Maybe she slept with the boss. They continue to be very hostile. And in those situations, we as an organization need to make the decision about whether or not they fit. And if that person doesn't fit and they're not willing to, align with the values of the organization, then maybe it's time to look for another job. And that's the part where leadership and where HR come in, because they need to be able to walk the talk in terms of what they put up with and when they draw the line. But that's that's one thing, is just hiring people who bring that lens with them. So as I said, I've worked all over the world. I've gone to many different countries where I don't even speak the language, from Brazil to Thailand to, Senegal to Cameroon. And there's so many different elements that go into working into an organization. Like if you're joining a new organization or moving to a new country, or even if you're just going to an event and you don't know anybody. But the key thing is this is what I've learned through my own experience, because I have such an interesting and different background from a lot of people, is you need to love yourself. The work starts with you, because if you walk into a room and you have insecurities about who you are, you project that into the room and everybody else can feel it. If you walk into the room like you're somebody important, you're well dressed, you're well groomed, you have a big smile on your face, you're confident, people turn around and they go, who is that? So we have a lot of responsibility that we should be putting on ourselves to develop ourselves, to sharpen our presence, to learn how to, come into a room and command the space and be charismatic. So I think mindset and the work that we do with ourselves in terms of loving yourself is 100%, like, everybody should be doing that work. The other thing is embrace your diversity. So, I love Africa. I love my roots in Africa. I take every opportunity I can to support in different ways. I worked 3.5 years for a STEM organization in Africa, and we raised millions of dollars and made a big difference. And here's the thing, I may not be black-skinned, but the fact that I'm so proud of my African roots means I will choose an African print blazer over a black blazer any day. And I will go into important meetings with people who don't know me, but who have a lot of influence, and I will show up and people will go, oh my gosh, I wonder what the story is behind that blazer. Like, why is she wearing that? Because I'm different and I'm celebrating my difference and I'm not hiding it and I'm not trying to fit in. And so it creates opportunities for people to engage with you, because then they're like, not only is that person confident, but there must be a story behind why they're different, right? And they want to know. People are curious. They want to know. And so I would say, love yourself, celebrate your differences, wear it proudly on the outside. Don't try to, fit in, because fitting in doesn't serve us. And, and really, like, the other thing is reach out to people. Like, you want people to be curious about you. Well, sometimes they don't have the confidence and you need to be the one to open the door. So get into the practice of asking, oh, that's an interesting necklace. What's the story there? Or, you look like, this is my favorite line. I'll go somewhere and I'll look at somebody that I want to get to know, and I'll just walk up to them and I'll say, you look like someone important. What's your story? Everybody loves that, right? So the second you give them a little bit of acknowledgement, and everybody is important. We're all important in our own ways. But you ask the question, they love to tell you about who they are. And then in return, they ask you, what about you? And next thing you know no longer feel like you're uncomfortable and out of place. So these are all, simple tools and techniques that you can use to really feel at ease and to allow other people to feel at ease. And, you don't have to like everyone, but you can always treat everybody that you meet with respect. So body language, let's talk about body language for a second. So, most people think that we communicate with words, but, about 70% of our communication is nonverbal. And so body language is a huge part of it. And eye contact is a huge part of it. So if you're not comfortable looking people in the eye, especially if they're people who are different from you, if you're not comfortable smiling at them, if you're not comfortable even like walking towards them with your hand out to greet them, you're not going to have great experiences. And because I work with so many diverse companies and different settings with different kinds of people, I'm always practicing the nonverbal. So for example, if you're in a meeting, you pay attention to your body language. Are you sitting with your arms closed? Because this tells somebody who's looking at you that you're not interested in connecting, right? So keep your arms open, keep them by your side, have a nice smile, look relaxed, just be confident and don't avoid people. Because if you do that, they're not going to feel like you want to get to know them. And then they may not approach you either.
So how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm accessible, easy to reach. You can Google my name and you'll find multiple ways of reaching me. My website is KarenCraigs.com. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And I really do love to connect with people. I do coaching, one-on-one coaching. I have a group training program. I do webinars and speak and address different groups of people. There's lots of ways in which I can support individuals who are looking to either develop their own skills or to have their organization do better in this work. So I'm very accessible and I love chatting. So people should just feel free to reach out.
Is there anything else you want to say before we end this interview?
I grew up in Kenya where there was a lot of tribalism. People were hurting each other, burning each other, killing each other, stealing each other's land. And it was because we didn't appreciate difference. And if we look at the continent of Africa, like, yes, it's a continent, and yet there's so much richness and diversity. There's so many languages, so much culture, so much to celebrate. I want us, as we think about Africa and Africa's future, to really think of us as a one people, right? That we're diverse, we're rich, we're different, but we're so proud to be brothers and sisters. And I don't want, colonial history or the color of my skin or whether I'm Anglophone or Francophone or whether I'm Christian or not Christian to impact my ability to have a really good relationship with someone like you or anybody else. So I think one of the things that we as Africans need to do more of is really create that brotherhood and that sisterhood for each other, and to look beyond our differences and start to just show each other love. Because, hey, if we don't show each other love, then who's going to show Africa love, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. You're right. Hey, Karen, thank you very much for a great interview.
Thank you so much for giving me this time and this platform, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing, and I hope you continue to have more informative and valuable discussions on your platform.
Thanks to my guest, Karen Craggs-Mill. Thanks to you for listening. Visit her website at www.karencraggs.com to learn more about everything she does to help others. The Barry Media Show takes you places that you have never imagined. You can find me on Instagram at Barry Medias and on Twitter at Barry Medias.